Welcome to this session. My name is Benoit Hendricks, Principal Analyst at the ASF, and I'll be chairing this session today. It's a great pleasure to have with us Dr. Shorful Islam. Shorful is a Chief Product and Data Officer at OutThink, and he'll be presenting on measuring human risk and targeting behavior change. And he'll be giving us a real-world FTSE 100 example. Shorful works as Chief Product and Data Officer at OutThink. OutThink is a UK-based company offering SaaS solution, software as a service type solution, for helping companies managing their human risk. Shorful has a PhD in psychology, and he has been working with some of the world's largest companies on helping them with data science and behavioral change. Shorful started his career as a lecturer and a research fellow at Imperial College London. He's an experienced speaker, and I'm sure you will enjoy this session. This session will last approximately 25 minutes, including Q&As. Please join us and join the chat box and ask your questions. Shorful, over to you.
Thank you, Benoit. As Benoit mentioned, my name is Dr. Shorful Islam. I am the Chief Product and Data Officer at OutThink. Today, my talk is going to be about measuring human risk and targeting behaviour change, and I'm going to talk about a real-world example that we did. Now, a bit of context before we start. I've been doing cybersecurity. I'm new in the cybersecurity space, so I've been doing it for about a year. And a year ago, I met a CISO of a very large company in the UK, and he had the issue that he knew what the ICO statistics were saying, that 90% of security breaches are due to the people. But how do you tackle this? So he's been doing his security awareness training and getting good compliance data back, saying that people are completing the training. But his team are still telling him that the security tools are showing people still clicking on phishing links, downloading unauthorized apps, moving data across the organization without encryption. So his question was, well, how do I solve this? I know it's a problem, but how do we tackle it? So when I met him, like I said, a year ago, cybersecurity was new to me then. I said to him, with my background, which is in psychology, that's what I do. I predict when people are going to do something. So, for example, in the cybersecurity space, sort of predict why people are going to manifest risky behaviour. And then the idea is to understand those people. So, as I mentioned, my background is in psychology and behaviour change, and for my PhD, I try to predict accidents. So, trying to predict something as random as accidents. And I built a model to predict that. And if you're a parent, you'll be interesting to know that one of the reasons children have accidents, or one of the most important reasons that contribute to children have accidents, is the way you supervise them. But anyway, so I've taken that knowledge and I've used it in other domains. So I've explained to the CISO that what I have done in the past is I've done it in marketing, for example. So we would find something of interest that the organization either wants to increase or reduce. So, for example, whether they want to increase acquisition, which is getting new customers, increase people buying more products, either upsell or cross-sell, or reduce things like churn, so predict people who are about to leave them and try and reduce that. But obviously, as we know, people aren't a homogeneous group. You need to understand the different groups that they are, the different segments. So a lot of what we do is customer segmentation in this space. So just to give an example, and something I talked through with this CISO was, look, a client I'd worked for previously, we tried to measure churn. So the client was a subscription business, and what happened was that they were losing customers, who weren't resubscribing after 12 months. So what we did was we built a churn model, and what the churn model did was to predict really early on who would not resubscribe in 12 months' time. And the models are really accurate. I mean, if you have the data, you can make the models as accurate, in this instance, for example, as 90% accurate. But then obviously, as I mentioned, we identified those people and they're likely to churn, but they're different. So they're not all one homogeneous group. So you have to then start segmenting them. And there's a multitude of ways of segmenting them. You can do really advanced stuff, or you can do something really simple, which I'm just showing here, which is to run an RFM model. So that's what we did for this client. We ran a very simple RFM model, and we created 6 segments, which then allowed their marketing team to communicate with each of those people to reduce churn. And this is what we found. We found that historically their churn rate was 32% when we started. We started this intervention, and at the end of it, what we found was that we'd reduced churn by 8% down to 24%. And that in real terms for them meant rescuing 200,000 customers and annual revenues of $6 million. Okay. Now, so the CISO was like, this is really good and, it's really exciting, but how would you do it in my world? How would you do it in the security space? So the challenges he was giving to us was, I don't want to introduce another solution. I need to use existing solutions to collect the relevant data so that I can measure risk, human risk, and people who are going to be, who are going to exhibit risky behavior, but also use that data to segment people. He also didn't want us to collect additional data. He didn't want to burden people with more things to fill in. The thing he was saying to us was, and to me was, look, I'm not the only one who gives out security awareness training or training to the employees of the organization. There's HR, there's finance, there's even IT. They're all asking people to complete stuff. People haven't got the patience or the time to do anymore. So how can we collect this additional data without it being a burden to the end user? And then finally, how would we segment them so we don't treat all high-risk users exactly the same? So that was the challenge. How can we measure risk in cybersecurity? So the solution actually is quite straightforward, is to actually use the security awareness training, which was our tool in place in this organization, to collect that data. It was the data collection is actually embedded in the security awareness training. So as people go through the security awareness training, we collect human risk intelligence data. And from that, we're able to then do the kind of analysis that I'd shown the CISO that I'd been able to do in marketing. Now, obviously, all this data that we collect and calculate the human risk score is actually grounded in theories. So we went back to theories from psychology on behavior change, and we used the framework of theory of planned behavior. And what theory of planned behavior does, it's one of the most common theories of planned behavior. But what is interesting to do is that unless you have actual behavior, which you would then go to predict, you need to be able to predict that behavior when people complete the awareness training. So we use the theory of planned behavior because it's a good indicator of actual behavior based on people's intentions, beliefs, and attitudes. So that was a good way, things that we can measure within the security awareness training to be able to predict human risk going forward. And this was our formula, and we actually adopted this formula and added to it from someone called Carson, who wrote a paper on it. And his theory being that someone's intention to behave securely is determined by how much they know about security, so their knowledge. Do they care about it? So would they comply? So if they knew this how to behave securely, do they really care? Would they comply with security? The second one is self-efficacy. Do they know how? So you may know about security, you may want to comply with it, but you may not know how to do it. So do they know how to do the action that they're being asked to do? And then finally, what we call feasibility or productivity, and which is, you may want to, an employee would love to be secure, but that's not why they're at work. They're at work to do a job. And if the security practices impinge their ability to do their job, then you know what's going to happen. Their job is going to take priority and security won't take so much priority. Carson also mentioned in his paper that we need to ask these questions within the context of the organizational goal. So what we did is we embedded them into each of the training modules, so they're asked in the context of the task that the user has been asked to do the security training on. Okay, so that's how we measured the security human risk score. Now the next thing was how do we segment the user so we know what to do with them? Because as the CISO mentioned to us, he said, look, it would be great to measure human risk and segment, but we need to be able to do something with it. So what we did, again, we went back to a series of psychology, and we adopted something called the Johari window, or the Johari window was actually adopted by our chief scientific advisor, Professor Angela Sasse. Her and her PhD students took this framework of the Johari window and adapted it for cybersecurity, and it provided us a good framework which we could then adopt into our SaaS platform. And so from that framework of the Johari window, we created psychographic segmentation. And what that was to score people on two axes. One was on effective security, which is how do they feel about security. So someone with a strong, positive, effective security, really cares about security, thinks it's their personal responsibility and something they should be doing to help the organization. Someone with a strong negative effective security is someone who's frustrated by security policies and they just don't think they'll work, so they just don't bother using them, or they go work around. They think they're a hindrance rather than a help. And then the other axis is risk understanding. So someone with a positive risk understanding has good comprehension of security, and they also know what they do, how it impacts the outcome. So they know that if they do this, this is how the organization remains secure. A strong negative person is not only someone who has low understanding or knowledge of security, but also they hold misconceptions. So they might believe that actually, sending data or files through Dropbox when it's not the authorized company application for sending files is acceptable because it's secure. It's a commercial product. Why couldn't I use it? They actually hold misconceptions rather than just not know about security. So what you do is you plot people on a grid such as this, and ideally what you would like is to have people on the top right corner. That's where you want all your employees to be. You want to avoid people being in the bottom right, because they're people who have really high knowledge of security, so they know why they should behave secure, but they're very disaffected. They don't feel it applies to them. They don't feel that they need to adhere to the security policies. The people in the top left of the quadrant are people who do care about security. They want to behave secure. They just don't have the knowledge. They're not empowered. They're not empowered to do it. So they're the kind of people that you would want to move from left to right. And then obviously you've got people at the bottom left corner. And if you have people there, typically what the literature was saying in the paper that we were basing this on was that it's probably a cultural problem. People have low understanding of security, but also they don't believe that the policies are suitable for the organisation. So what we did was, within the security awareness training, we deployed measurements to measure people's human risk, as well as segmenting them on a psychographic segmentation. And we collect data from thousands of employees. So in this organisation, the organisation was hundreds of thousands of people, but we only did a pilot, and we targeted about a few thousand people. And the results were as such. So what we could do is we could identify human risk, and what we found was that the organisation as a whole had a mid-level human risk score of 59.43, so it's the middle two blocks that we should really focus on. So 59.43, which is, okay. If they were above 80, that would be critical, something to worry about. So 59.43 is okay, but still room for improvement. But if you look at the bottom middle box, about 21% of those people are high risk. So they're the people that the CISO said that they're interested in. The security team sat down and said, right, okay, we're interested in those people. So we drilled down into those people, and we could start seeing that these were the high-risk people and why they were high risk. So you could see what department they fell into, we could see who the employees were, and we could also see their level of interest, their intention to comply, their perception of security measures in place, their knowledge test scores, and their sentiments. So we had an understanding of what score they were and why, but I think then the next step was to understand who they were. Okay, and for this we then map the high-risk people into the psychographic segmentation. And what you find, and this is quite typical actually, this is normally how an organisation would map with high-risk people. A lot of people are in the top right quadrant, as you can see. There's a few scattered on the bottom right and a few on the top left. So you get that kind of scattering. So we don't want to focus on everyone because this is a pilot, and the CISO said, well, let's make a start. Let's try and target some of these groups and make an impact. So we agreed to the first group to look at was the followers. And what the literature was telling us about the followers are, these are people who have good intentions. They would like to behave securely, but they just don't have enough understanding. They have some understanding, so they can, on their own, act secure, but they just don't have enough understanding to know which way to go. So if they came across a new behaviour, then they could be influenced by other people. So ideally you want them influenced by people who know security, the right type of security, and they move forward, as opposed to people who know bad security and they go down rather than to the right. So that was one group that we looked at. The other group that they were interested in was the willing and the champion, mainly the champions. The willing people are, again, people with high knowledge of security, high effectiveness towards security. So they believe security is a good thing and they should be doing it, but slightly lacking knowledge. So they weren't that confident to tell someone else how to behave secure, even though they may be behaving securely themselves. Whereas the champion group were very knowledgeable and did believe that security was very important. So that was a group that was of interest to the CISO. And then finally, there were two groups that they wanted to look at, which were extremes, which were naive. And so naives are an interesting group because, again, they hold a generally positive outcome towards security, but what they don't know is why they're doing it. They don't have the knowledge to know why they're doing it. So sometimes they want to act secure, but they'll watch other people, or they think something is secure, or they may have misconceptions about security and go down a route that is not really aligned with the company policy. And then finally, you have shadow agents. So shadow agents, interestingly, are a very highly knowledgeable group of individuals. They know a lot about security, and they know what the outcome would be if they did something, but they don't actually feel that the security policy applies to them, or it's aligned to how they want to do their job. Now, with the shadow agent, there's actually two types of people in that, which we were discussing with the CISO, according to the literature. One is that there are those who are malicious, so people who know how security works and they know how to bypass it. They could have malicious intent. But you also have some people who know all about security, but they don't have malicious intent. So they bypass security only because they want to get their job done, not because they have any intent to do harm to the organization. They just want to get the job done, so they operate in a certain way that means that they pose or risk to the organization. So once we'd identified those groups, we decided to design the interventions for those groups. And what we did is, obviously, in OutThink, we had Angela, who was our Chief Scientific Advisor, but we also had a panel of CISOs, and we sat down with also this organisation, the FTSE 100 company, and we talked about how we would do it. So again, we referenced back to the literature, and this is what we came up with, or these were the recommendations. So for the follower group, these are the people who, as I mentioned, want to behave secure, but not really sure how they should behave secure. So for them, it was educate them more. Okay, so give them posters, put up posters where they are, to run webinars, send them regular updates on what good security behaviour looks like, and also direct them towards champion who can advise them when they're uncertain of whether a behaviour is the right thing to do or not the right thing to do. The second group we identified were the champions, and so we asked the organisation and the CISO to recruit this segment as champions within the organisation. And the way to make sure they remain champions is to empower them with the right knowledge, tools and resources. So not only do they continue to exhibit safe behaviours, but also that they can confidently help others, because that's what you want champions to do. You want champions to propagate safe behaviour by demonstrating and showing other people. We then looked at the naive and shadow agent. Like I said, they're pretty similar in some respects, but they are on two different axes. So for the naive, it is a lack of understanding. So what we said is that, look, they're probably susceptible to social engineering, so we should do more training around that so they don't fall victim to hacks or security risks. So for that group, it was a case of that they just needed more security knowledge so they could up their knowledge and move towards the right. With the shadow agent, we knew they knew their stuff, so there was no point giving them more training. What we did want to do was to discriminate them also by bringing them into a workshop and saying, oh, you need to adhere to the rules. If they don't want to adhere to the rules, then there's not much you can do about it. So what they decided here, and that this was the solution that this company wanted to do, is that they would that they agreed that the SOC would prioritize alerts for this user group. So if they saw this user group downloading unauthorized applications or moving data around, it would just flag them up, and you could just keep an extra eye on them to make sure that nothing malicious happening. Like I said, a lot of the people in this group don't do anything intentionally malicious. They just do things because they want to get the job done. Okay, so what we've done now is we've taken an existing solution that they'd been using, our security awareness training program, and we'd collected data which was embedded in that. And from that, we're able to quantify human risk, and then we're able to segment those users so that the organisation and the CISO could go off and target those individuals and have a place to start. Rather than thinking that I've got where do I start, how do I get going, they had a place to start. Okay, so some key takeaways. Okay, so the first one is, if you want to understand your people better, you need to know them. And the only way to know them is to collect data about them. And the more automated this collection is, the better. Okay, what you don't want to do is set up a separate survey or a separate solution to collect data about individuals to quantify human risk. Okay, you need to embed it into something. Okay, so like I said, our solution embeds the data collection so that the employee doesn't know that they're providing data, they just know that they're completing the security awareness training. The other thing is, your employees are not a homogeneous group. So even when you identify the high-risk group, they're not one homogeneous group. So you need to be able to group them into meaningful psychographic segments. Okay. So next is to establish a baseline. Okay. we, in this example with the CISO, he wanted to quantify human risk, and that was what we thought was a useful place to start. Other organisations may decide that human risk is not where they want to start. They want to start on satisfaction, or they want to start on engagement. But you need to start somewhere. You need to quantify something, because otherwise you won't know what you're trying to measure and then what you're trying to mitigate. The other thing we were very cognizant was to make our insights actionable. We were presenting a lot of this academic framework to the CISO, and he came back and said, look, I don't want just theoretical stuff. I want stuff that I can do with my team. That would make a huge difference. So we made sure, using practitioners and academics together, to make sure that the measurements drove easy to deploy improvement actions. That's quite key. They have to be easy to deploy. You can't come up with a whole new work stream. The CISO said to me early on, look, my team is really busy. I can't start doing new things. You need to be able to make things that are easy to deploy. And then finally, demonstrate change, security behaviour change. So don't make it a one-off. So whether you run your security awareness training every year, every 6 months, every quarter, whatever you do, or it's continuous, you need to be continually collecting the data. You need to be continually running interventions or improvement actions, and then measuring and seeing if they work, and then optimize, obviously, because some things will work, some things won't work, and they will differ from different organizations. So we're now on that journey with our client. We're now looking to see what works, what doesn't work, and to optimize. Okay, well, thank you very much. That's me. I'm Shorful Islam. If you'd like to know more, my email's there. Please do get in touch. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Shorful. That was a great session. Good to learn also from a real-world experience from FTSE 100. I know we talked a little bit about this before. It's anonymized data,
yes,
and it's been shuffled around, so we don't see the real trend.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, a lot of this data is confidential. So what I presented is anonymized and randomized data. So it's real data, but not assigned to the right groups or departments.
So I have a few questions for you. And I know we have some coming in the chat box as well, but I'll get started with, you know about this typical security awareness program, yeah, that we all hate, really. Do we still have to do that, or?
Well, I mean,
take on this.
I think you're not going to get away from it. So you're going to have to run the security awareness training. I mean, that's something that you're not going to be able to get away from. So you would have to do that. It's just that what I would ask is that with the sort of modern technologies now, the ability to collect telemetry data from these systems is to have more than just deliver the training. Have the ability to identify people who are at risk, and have the ability to segment people who are at risk, and so that you can do something about it, rather than just deliver the training and then look back on the data and say, right, I've got 100% completion rate. As a CISO, you should be able to get more information from that training. So you should look for solutions that give you more than just training to your employees, gives you knowledge and information back. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Great. So a little bit of it, but being a bit more smart about
Absolutely.
what type of training we give to our employees.
Absolutely.
I like this slide in the middle where you show this dashboard, and I know that the data is not real, it's semi-real. Yeah? Do you have any kind of pattern on what you find out? Do you find out the security, the compliance teams, do they fare better usually, and the marketing a bit less, or is that a typical kind of cliche? Or
I mean, what you find if you look at the department level, there isn't much difference within departments. So you get, except for like the security teams and, like you said, the IT teams, they have quite a lot of knowledge, so they score quite low on security. But if you looked at marketing, finance, HR, they don't score that different between them. But when you look at individual groups of them, so people who, for example, in finance who have access to personal information, you'll see that they actually score quite well. They score low in security because they've probably had that training where they need to realize that if they have access to personal information, that they shouldn't go around sharing it. Whereas people who are probably more junior or don't have access to that kind of information, they do score quite highly. So even though across departments, you won't see much, but you will typically see, like I said, the security teams, the IT teams, people who use technology often score low in risk. A sales team actually, interestingly, score quite high, and that's not because of their knowledge. They're very knowledgeable. They just feel that security is a barrier. So if you imagine, especially remote sales team who are out there in the field trying to do sales, logging on in remote places, they usually quite score high, but that's mainly because their intention to comply is low, or they find that self-efficacy is low because it affects their productivity.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Shorful. No, I like the idea of segmenting the organization by different departments, and then you tailor your programs, your awareness program, your security programs according to their kind of perception of security matters. And probably the last question I have for now is how long did this kind of work take, do you think, for an organization? Is it like a large piece of assessment, engagement, or?
No, so interestingly, our solution is a SaaS solution, so it's in the cloud. So to deploy was quite easy. The client just uploaded, or the organisation just uploaded their employee data on there, and we could target the training. You know what takes the longest, obviously, going through the legals to make sure that we have the right agreements in place to have employee data. But once you've got the data in there and you can deploy the solution, it's a cloud-based solution, so it just goes out to people's inboxes. It depends on the organisation. So this organisation wanted actually a long period. They had like 10 to 12 weeks. So they gave people 10 to 12 weeks to complete the training. So if you imagine if you get an email saying you've got to complete this in the next 3 months, you're not going to do it urgently, you'll do it over 3 months. So it did take us a long time to get that data. I mean, it was thousands of cases. But if you narrow the window, we found with other organisations where you narrow the window and you say you've got 3 weeks, 2 weeks, people complete the training within that time. Reminders obviously go out. The organisation sends out reminders, some a bit harsh than others. Some say, you know, if you don't complete it, we'll tell your line manager. Others just encourage. So we have, it depends really what the organisations is, but the data is automatic, so it's always being collected, and the dashboards are always live. So literally from, you know, as soon as people start completing the awareness training, the CISO and the security team start getting access to the data.
Nice. So a couple of weeks and you can get these kind of assessments. Very interesting assessments. Very, very interesting sessions. I hope you found out useful like I did. Our members, we're now closing the session. Thank you very much. Thank you, Shorful.
Thank you very much, Benoit. Thank you.